brand the story and to make it very visible, and to depict visually that we were developing consistency and expectations in how development would address environmental concerns, and that we really wanted this to be something, like I said, visual. I'm saying that over and over again because, and available at every front counter, and so that we were in a way responding to the request from the development community that they were saying, I want to see consistency across our 4 local governments in the valley, and I'm going to talk about it a little bit more, but we realized we can't actually, at this point in time, harmonize our development procedures so that they can experience consistency when they interact with each one of our agencies, but we can at least start communicating expectations, consistent expectations, as we continue to develop potentially harmonized development procedures across our governments. And so, yeah, like I said before, we were starting with the assumption that the development community was our target audience, that, oh, if we just got it right, telling them that we want their applications to include this information, then, you know, then we'll start seeing the development that we want. But we actually realized, I mean, there's such a bigger context to that, and Alan's going to use the word belt to describe this, is that there's so many different actors involved in this transformation of the ecosystem, watershed-based planning. And so, I mean, I don't know how many times I've been in conversations on any kind of sustainability topic where it's the chicken and the egg. Oh, well, if we just, it's the politician's role to show leadership and then for them to direct staff. Or it's the public's role to elect enlightened leaders. Or it's the staff's role to advise their council. And yet, of course, they're directed by their council. Oh, but it's the nonprofit's role to educate the public who go on to elect their officials. So, like, which part in that system do you interject with to lever that change most effectively? And we realized that there's no, like, one answer. It's just we're all contributing to it. And I won't get into this table too much, but it is in the slide deck. It's just, we just tried to map it out. We realized that there's topics that relate to governance. So that would be audiences such as our CAOs and our politicians, and the various tools, elements, challenges, approaches that are in their world. And then there's, for staff, often we're looking more at the actual legislation, the tools that are available to us, the regulations we can develop, and so our audiences are our fellow staff in the development community. And then nonprofit sector, Jack was talking about that, reaching the people. So there's a whole range of tools you can use to leverage them. And then we actually recognize that one of the most important things in synergizing this work across these various actors is the doing a project together. So Chris talked about the doing the monitoring of the copper mine. And so in our team approach in the Valley, we thought we need something to actually dig our hands on and practice that collaboration on the ground in. And one of our examples was the Brooklyn Creek Watershed Blueprint. We got really excited about the Watershed Blueprint approach from Bowker Creek and down in the CRD. And so that's just, that remains a goal, a recommendation, an option perhaps, if not right at this moment. So one of our inspirations in developing the guide was, again, so I just talked about Bowker Creek's blueprint. They communicated their development expectations through a guide that looks very similar to the one that we now have, and is actually copies just over there, so you can grab one after. And so this is just that, you know, learning through the CABI network. And but we did actually realize as we went through the development of this guide is that we can't simply just cut and paste what they did. For one, they actually had an endorsed, adopted plan that then their recommendations were flowing from. We're a bit opposite. We don't have the plan. We don't have the commitment yet. We're in a way, I guess, trying to convince that we need to be working on this watershed-based scale collaboratively. And at the same time, we're developing the tools as we go along. So it's kind of an interesting message to communicate. I think we're explicitly recognizing that we don't have it all figured out. And so the document that we have now created is both a call to action, you could say, a touch point for that call to action, and then a roadmap on that potential action. So I'm just going to walk through the document, and Judy's just going to speak a little bit to a couple of the tools just created in it. Maybe one other thing I'll just say is that we recognize this document is going to be very flexible because as the conversation evolves, hopefully, and that we develop the tools and the strategies and we learn from them, both here and across the IREI, that we need to reflect those lessons in the document as it evolves. So it's not a static thing. And I'm really excited to hear what Melanie's going to talk about in Coquitlam, because they've actually, I mean, they don't just have a guide, they have a campaign and almost, communication strategy around that. So that was not our initial intent in creating this guide, but who knows, maybe we'll learn some other things that then have ideas or lessons for here. So the document, if you want to follow along on the, I guess just on the first page, we're reminding people a bit of Watershed 101. It doesn't matter where you live in a watershed. I mean, it's kind of a basic, we know this, but perhaps others aren't thinking that way. And then on the second page, we're communicating that we have a shared responsibility, that there is a committed valley-wide vision through the, as established through the regional growth strategy that does put environmental protection right there, right in its vision statement, and that there are many benefits to green infrastructure. So for someone who's new, hopefully they're just orienting to this point. One thing that we felt was really important to highlight is that let's say an applicant, a resident, a developer is coming in and they're interacting with our regulations at the OCP level, at the local government level. Perhaps they're frustrated with those regulations, red tape, green tape, whatever. But they don't realize that, or perhaps we just need to keep reminding them that this is actually coming from the province and a variety of other regulations and initiatives that over time that have been built up, and that we are part of that picture, that we are part of the implementation of these larger provincial goals. So some of them are the Living Water Smart, the Green Communities Act, the Water Sustainability Act. All of those have enabling language that allow us to be doing what we're talking about today. Then of course CAVI's the forum, this kind of networker between all of us, and then we all know what regional growth strategies are down, and then which can inform and direct and complement local government plans and regulations. And it's really funny that us as our team, we were just really thinking about all of us kind of more bureaucrat type bodies, and then we all of a sudden realized, oh yeah, you got to include the landowner on this cycle here, because that's the person who we want to pick up the document and realize they are part of the picture in achieving those watershed goals. We each have a role to play. And it's not just coming out of nowhere. It's not just some fad. It's actually a longer-term work program. So on the centerfold of the document, there's some selected strategies to achieve watershed goals and selected tools. These are things that we felt that we could highlight because we're actually either on the cusp of engaging in them, or actually currently developing them, or maybe even doing them. So I'm not going to talk about them at length, but we just give a little bit of an example of what's happening regionally. We talk about the value of watershed blueprints. We talk about how education is really important all along that process. Judy, maybe if you just want to talk to a couple of the tools.
Yeah, just a couple that are actually we're working on. The tree protection bylaw, both the village and the city of Portneuf are working on a tree protection bylaw, and we're collaborating on it. Comox already has a good tree protection bylaw, so we'll be talking about it too. And it's really important. This probably, Emmanuel, you'll be talking later about that. This is another nature services. So trees, just for rainwater management alone, they're intercepting about 30% of the rainfall, and it goes back in evaporation, so that doesn't even reach the ground. And about another 30% hits the ground, but of that percentage, some is getting taken back up by the roots, and again, through evapotranspiration, is going back to the atmosphere. And then the remaining water is going into the ground and percolating into groundwater and aquifers. And I often think of an example. I worked with a developer at a very large tract of land, and it's very complicated hydrology. Very hard to tell. It was all forested. It was mostly alder and deciduous trees. He cut the entire land down because he said he couldn't see what was happening with the water until all the trees were gone. And he certainly knew what the water was doing then. It really created a lot of problems. But we're working on that tree protection. The other one we've done is design charrette. And this was a project in Cumberland that we started this with. It's been used a lot. Probably any of you with planning backgrounds have done the kind of design charrette workshop session. But what it does is bring all the disciplines together. So you've got engineering and finance. Finance, what a good idea. And planning and public works and all the players at one time, going to the site, talking about the problems, going through the issues. We solve more things quicker than doing individual reviews. That's normally how you would do it, is put it through all your departments. And if it's any common complaint with mostly planning and engineering, we want to see it up front. And that's what was really good to pull everybody together. those are just two tools that we're actually using right now.
Yeah, and the part about the charrette that I particularly like,
Yeah,
because I had
me
the
too.
pleasure of being able to attend the Cumberland review session, was, I mean, I know there are review teams that can be assembled within an organization, but in particular, we made a point of doing a site visit, so it's really important to see the site, and the developer was there as well. And then actually, in the review process, and I think it's because Judy has the ability to have a nice, graphic hand, when people were talking about concepts, we could quickly show a different idea, and it was just, right away it was you could talk about it more easily in your mind. So that's what a charrette is, a little bit different beyond just a typical kind of review type of team approach. So also in the guide on the third last page, we did provide a few tips to an applicant on how to prepare a successful application. Know how your land drains, use site design that fits the land, use pre-application meetings, and then remember that actually your application only starts here. So I mean, my own, some of my colleagues, more senior colleagues, they often feel that the developer feels like their application has started here. And that when the clock starts, that they're like, hey, why is it taking so long? Why isn't my development going anywhere? Well, maybe actually because they haven't actually gotten all the pieces together to actually submit the application. And then on our end, that's when the clock starts ticking. And then implementation, implement site management plans. I mean, that's kind of obvious, but monitoring, local governments having a stronger role in actually monitoring that monitoring is what we're looking at more. And then actually informing the landowner of their green infrastructure. We're developing that with one of our stewardship groups, Piercy Creek Street Keepers, where the developer is required to pay a little bit of money to develop a brochure that then the homeowners will get about the creek that's in their backyard. So, and we've talked about doing that for bioswales and whatnot too, because people don't know what they are, they might just pave over and do what they want with them. So one thing that we had realized though is when we first developed these planning tips, we actually wanted to make the step-by-step process. This is what you do to achieve a successful application, or at least get it through the gate. And we realized that across the 4 local governments, we could not align that. We have different capacities, different corporate cultures. We're just not there yet, and maybe we never will be. But we certainly spent some time talking about that. That could we develop a process flow chart like Kamloops is here, where it shows exactly, application goes in, and then it goes to this person, and then this, and it's all laid out. And this is something, yeah, I mean, I saw this one from Kamloops, and I just thought I'd share it because I think it really highlights the complexity of all the people who are involved. And when that communication isn't tight, then there's inefficiencies, information can get lost and that kind of thing. So, I mean, this is an example of their subdivision one. I mean, that was just a tiny little excerpt of it, but I mean, they have this really tightly mapped. I haven't spoken to them how it works, but I think it's a helpful roadmap for sure. So, is it even appropriate to align our internal review procedures across local governments? I don't know, but we thought at one point that could help achieve that developer's goal or request for consistency. And then, I mean, second to last page, just reminding people what local governments do. I work as an environmental planner. People often think that we are the ones who are going to be doing the arborist assessments, the biological assessments. They have to realize that we are regulators, that we don't actually do a lot of that work on the private land. And then we remind them what they can do. And I just wanted to do a little shout out for one of the documents that the City of Courtney's produced, our second annual State of the Environment report. And there's copies, I'll put them on the table over there. And this is specifically geared at the residents to say, what can you do? So we're trying to do more with our outreach. And then the document ends with just showing all the watersheds. And yeah, our goal is that when a developer comes in, that they can start actually pinpointing which watershed they're in. And then they can be connected to the watershed stewardship group who works on that. And they can be given the watershed library for that topic so that they can orient themselves on the needs and issues of that watershed. So this is all part of the communication. So that's the document. I don't know, is there any like really immediate questions or